and welcome. My name's Oliver Heath, and I'd like to welcome you to the first in our series of Planted Unearthed talks in partnership with the National Trust here at the beautiful Stourhead House. In our latest series of talks entitled Cool Design, Sustainable Futures, we're going to be exploring how we design places, spaces and systems to mitigate the dual threats to humanity of the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. Last summer, for the first time on record, the UK recorded temperatures in excess of 40 degrees centigrade, and according to the latest UN report published last month, the world is almost certain to experience new record temperatures in the next 5 years, with temperatures likely to rise by more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. As we enter uncharted territory, the threats posed to human civilization, ecosystems, economies, and global infrastructure are only just beginning to be understood. In a world which is hotting up, how does the role of design play in keeping us cool and creating a world where humans can live in harmony with nature and natural systems? I'm delighted to be here for the first talk in amongst a fantastic lineup of experts, with this talk entitled Biophilic Design and Climate Change, sponsored by Richmond Bell Architects. Once again, we have this brilliant panel. So what I'm going to do is introduce each of our panelists by name, and then I'm going to ask each of them to just introduce themselves for a few minutes, tell us about their experience, a little bit about their relationship with nature. We're then going to have about half an hour of structured questions, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from you, the audience. So I'd like to welcome Vanessa Champion from the Journal of Biophilic Design, Hugo Bugg from Harris Bugg Studio, and James Scully from Recork. So give him a little round of applause. So thank you. If we could start with Vanessa, if you'd like to just introduce yourself for a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, hello everybody. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? I'm here on Mother Earth. So I'm Vanessa Champion. I'm editorial director and founder of the Journal of Biophilic Design. We're actually exhibiting over there, so do come and say hi as well. I've always been living close to nature. I'm actually an artist as well, so I'm a photographer and a visual artist. So my landscapes and sort of creating audioscapes and things to do with nature has always been very close to my heart. So when I went off and when I finished my degree, my PhD in Greek and Latin at UCL, I was also doing photography. But I went off and worked in advertising and marketing with the BBC and ITV and History Channel and banks and all that kind of stuff. And it was great. And I had burnout and it was inevitable, really. So I kind of reconnected myself back to nature. I took some time out back to nature. And at the same time, which you couldn't make up, both my parents were sick, and my dad, who had Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, spent his last days looking at ceiling tiles. And because I was a photographer, I'm thinking, we're missing a trick. Why isn't he looking at a beautiful naturescape? Why isn't he looking at tree leaves and beautiful clouds that may be moving? Because his frame of reference, having dementia, must have been really, really small. So I then went off and researched it. Having been an academic, I wanted to know about it. And then one thing led to another, and now I've got the journal. So, and that's what I do. I just kind of collect and I bring people together and I bring voices together because I'm really, really, really passionate about our connection to nature and how it's a key to unlocking our health and well-being and also to unlocking the health of the planet as well. So, that's me.
Thank you. Hugo.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Oliver and Planted, for inviting me here today. So I am a garden designer, and our studio, Harris Bugg Studio, do gardens and landscapes. We're actually a team of 13 designers now, and we cover all sorts of projects across the UK and even internationally, from gardens down in Cornwall, estates, Chelsea Flower Show that we were at recently, up to the Highlands. And our studio, this talk today actually really resonates with us because we are a values-driven company, and that's firstly just connecting people with nature. That is clients, but also users of all the gardens and landscapes that we design. Secondly, just being environmentally aware, being sensitive in the designs that we do and we build. And finally, just the well-being and creativity of our own practice and all the people that work for us. And so our projects, we like I say, that they do range also from commercial projects as well, and really working with the built environment and connecting landscapes and gardens with the built environment within the city, but also in rural landscapes too. And we're a studio which loves collaboration. We love collaborating with leaders of different disciplines to ensure that our designs are the best they can be, wherever they might be and for whoever they might be. And so, yeah, that's me.
So I think you missed off something a little bit there, didn't you? Hugo's being very modest. Just come back from the Chelsea Flower Show. How did you do there?
We did all right. Yeah, we did
All
it.
right.
We did. We got
on.
a gold medal and best in show.
Thank
Amazing.
You Can't leave that bit out.
Yeah, and that was for an amazing charity called Horatio's Garden. And just in terms of connecting people with nature, that is a charity which are building gardens for all of the spinal trauma centres across the country. And there's 11 of them, and we're doing number 8, which is in Sheffield. But we took it to Chelsea first. And if you break your back, you'll typically could be in hospital for at least 6 months. And so, similar to your dad, like having an outdoor nature-based environment that you can be in, away from the busy ward, the antithesis of a ward, and that Formica environment. And so, yeah, we designed a garden at Chelsea which just showcases how fully adaptive and accessible gardens can be beautiful, and really listening to patients about what they need and want in a garden, in a landscape, and designing that to the best of our ability, and really using Chelsea as a platform to showcase that to the world, which is a great experience.
James.
Hi everyone, I'm James Scully, and I founded Recork, which is a cork flooring business, about 2 years ago. And I also have a different business, which is a commercial flooring company, which has been going for some time now. I live in Sussex, East Sussex, with my wife and my 3 children. And I'm passionate about the environment generally, and wildlife and birds and all sorts of things like that. So when I started Quadrant, we were selling carpets and all sorts like that to architects for office developments in the UK. And over the years, that became more and more frustrating for me because I didn't see change happening particularly quickly. And if I'm honest with you, I saw quite a lot of greenwash going on, and I found it very, very difficult as a small business to compete in that environment. So I wanted to find something that was different, was sustainable, and I could really believe in. So I partnered up with a Portuguese cork manufacturer. So their basic business is making cork stoppers for wine bottles and such like, and they make 22 million a day, just vast quantities of cork. And they used to be famous back in the day in the 80s. A company called Wicandas were well known for slightly orange-looking cork tiles for floors. And they'd gone badly out of fashion. But the industry was still going, and I partnered with these guys, and we set about trying to reintroduce cork into the UK, specifically into the commercial market. And we were fairly successful at that. So we've done work with all the big architects in the UK for very major clients, such as Amex and Shell. So the concept of cork to young, new designers is really interesting because it's such a sustainable product. In the last couple of years, I felt I wanted to go further because traditional cork flooring is a composite product, and therefore it's not ideal. So we created Recork to make a really pure product that was as sustainable as we could make it. It's just really cork and some finishes on top to protect it. And now I can go and speak to people about it, and I have total confidence that I don't have to greenwash it or spin it anyway. It is an incredibly sustainable product, and the whole journey's been very exciting because cork really is an incredible product, a raw material to work with. So we're here. We have a stand in the courtyard there. So, and I think we've got some little samples we'll hand around if you want to take a look at what we're talking about.
Great. Thank you. So our subject matter predominantly is around biophilic design. Now, for the uninitiated, biophilia means a love of nature, and it explains humans' innate attraction to nature and natural processes. In a way, it looks at how humans can benefit from the nature connection, whether that's to reduce stress, to aid recuperation in the gardens that Hugo was talking about, but maybe also to connect us to spaces, places, and nature. What's a little bit more difficult to understand is how this human-nature connection and the way that we bring nature into our built environment can actually help to mitigate the impact of the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. And that's kind of what we're going to be discussing here. Not necessarily how nature supports our well-being, but how it helps us to face the many challenges that we're having to meet today. So to kick off, Vanessa, when do you think we started to lose our connection to nature, and what's been the effect of it?
Factories. I think like way back when we produced workplaces and hospitals where we were all in rows and it's all very clinical. I think that was the start. The whole time and motion thing. I think that was probably one of the key times, and I think. Unfortunately, I think our mindset is still the same. A lot of workplaces and businesses are still seeing that kind of mentality because they think, oh yes, let's produce, let's get everybody producing work and being there, and because obviously we've got burnout and we haven't got any mental distraction which nature brings us. We've forgotten that we are part of nature, that we are nature. We are human beings. We're living species. We need to breathe and feel the air on our bodies, and I think it compounded in the 60s in some way. But I think there's, a whole built environment. I mean, you think about the new builds that have gone up as well. That's the whole, with the homes and things, where it was literally, square lines, like Hellenistic sort of cities almost, where square boxes, no round shapes. It was all efficient, bottom line. Whereas instead of thinking what's going to be good for people and planet, what's going to be good for the people actually in the communities using it and the social spaces, it's been about money. And I think that was really bad in the sort of 70s, really. And I think we're seeing the repercussions of that. I mean, it's obviously sort of gone on a bit and things, but for me, that's when I witnessed it, really.
So to a certain extent, it was the Industrial Revolution when people moved out of the countryside and into city centres that inevitably we're going to lose a connection with the beauties of nature, and we start to live in these kind of tight, cramped spaces.
Yeah, I heard a stat a while back that it was since 1950s. References of nature in songs, poems, literature has dropped by like 2/3. And so if you add on then into generations, and now we're in a generation, if there's so much less references to nature in what we're hearing and listening to and seeing. And I think that combined with our lifestyles, just our work-life balance and availability of products and produce and how we buy things, we can easily get it from the internet. We can get seasonal produce out of season all year round. Much more IT-led lifestyles. I think just the combination of all of these things just leads to a more and more disconnect of nature, and then seeing that as a generational shift too, then a new generation are, coming into a world where it is less, you're less with it, you're less working with it. So
how did that industrialization affect garden design?
Good question. I think it's just how we respect gardens and how much time we spend in gardens, and that sort of, again, like that lifestyle shift of how much time we are spending in our gardens and enjoying them, but also working with them. And I think there is a shift back again now to realising that we need to get back into nature to prevent burnout, to relax, to enjoy. So hopefully we're starting to see a bit of a trend back into our gardens and back to designing gardens and embracing them.
In the heritage city that I live in Brighton, lots of the Victorian buildings are very much sort of beautifully fronted onto kind of public squares. But at the back of the building, the kitchens and the toilets and the bathrooms kind of back onto a little patio garden. And it seems that we've gone from that sort of industrialized approach to architecture being about status. And now the houses are turning around where we're actually putting the living spaces, the kitchens and the gardens, and trying to open those living spaces in the house to the gardens, to strengthen that connection and going, it's not just about the way a house looks, it's about how it makes us feel, and our connection to nature is fundamental. So we're seeing obviously, the increase in things like folding sliding doors, big patio doors, and connecting and making those spaces more fluid, I think.
Yeah, and I think if your day job, you're not outside, which, 50 years, 100 years ago, you would have spent more time outside doing labour jobs and different types of jobs than your personal life, you want to be in nature. So there is that in your homes trying to improve that. And I think also that shift into the 1950s. Probably like budgets now for public spaces and gardens have shifted from the grand days of beautiful, Victorian gardens and things. The resources available now at the moment on public spaces is much smaller, and so there's more pressure on those spaces and more people, more higher population. So.
And James?
Well, from my point of view, the office, I mean, we've specialised in office work over the years, and I remember when all we sold was acres and acres of blue or grey carpet tiles. It was just relentless sales of blue or grey carpet tiles into an office that looked the same with rows and rows of desks and no soul really. And that started to change about 15 years ago, I guess, as the architects began to take on biophilic principles. And now I would think that probably only maybe 50% of the office is given over to actual workspace, and another 50% might be given over to breakout spaces, or anywhere that people can go to recharge their batteries or work in a more biophilic environment, and that means a lot more natural products have come in. You've got tea yurts and all sorts of wonderful things coming into architecture now that make the office a completely different place than it used to be. And that's just all about making people feel more relaxed and more productive in an environment that helps their business make money. But you talk about burnout a lot, and there's so much stress involved in your working life now. And I think the emphasis on that is growing more and more now. So it's a very different environment, and it's great for people like us that are trying to promote biophilic materials and natural materials, because they're being incorporated a lot into the workspace.
Vanessa, do you think there was a clear parallel between this disconnection from nature and the rise in the kind of the symptoms and effects of the climate crisis and biodiversity loss? As we turned our back from nature and said, "Oh, we don't need that. We can build a better place." Was there a strong parallel? Because so much of the conversation right now is about carbon. When we talk about sustainable buildings, it's about embedded carbon or in-use carbon. But we've forgotten that actually nature and our connection to it is so important. So tell me a little bit more about the parallels.
Yeah, I think as we've moved away from nature, we've forgotten what it's like and what it does for us. And I think for me, biophilia, the whole innate connection to nature, and we need to be near nature. I think when that happened, I think when our working lives split and our schools split from having that connection. I remember my mother was 80 odd when she died, but she was brought up after the war, during the war, and they all had gardens and they grew their own food, and it was very much, even in inner city London, there was very much still that connection. Obviously there was the factories and all this kind of thing where people were going to work and things, but they were going to work and there were tree-lined streets and there was bird song and everything. I think when that happened, I think we then started to, turn on the lights, and it was like, electricity and all the new gadgets and things that we've got as well. I think we didn't think that actually this is going to have an impact on the environment. I think the education piece wasn't there because, again, it was to do with selling stuff, selling your Maggi mixes and all this sort of thing that we needed, whereas years ago your gran would beat the eggs and would beat the things by hand, and it was a sort of a comfort space, I suppose, as well. It was convenience, obviously convenience food as well, which started to come in. And I think after the war, people were so excited. I mean, my mum used to always go off about buy plastic, and I'm like, "Mum, stop buying plastic." We'd have rows at the at the checkout when she would buy a plastic bag, and it'd be like awful. And I'm sorry about that, Mum. She's up in the sky now, but it's a different mindset, and I think it's actually now we're so much more educated about it. We understand the impact it's having, and that it is a finite source. And even though my mum was really passionate about the hedgerows and chopping down trees and stuff, that sort of other connection was somehow lost. And I think it was really after the war, convenience, that sort of thing. And I think with the impact of that and sort of all the materialistic things that came in, I think was a relief for people. But I think that then led to an disconcern, an unconcern. I don't know what the English grammar thing was there. I just said it a journal, by the way. So you know what I mean? I think it was just made like a barrier between us and really the impact it had.
So in a way, we were really connected to nature, and even,
Yeah.
in the 30s, 40s, and 50s,
Yeah.
we were growing our own. But then technology came in, we became more consumer-led. And I guess one of the benefits of technology was the opportunity for education. And I think in a way we've become more systems thinkers, haven't we? We've now, like you said, started to go, this plastic bag isn't just a plastic bag in my hand. This is kind of millennia old carbon that's been dug up and used and turned into a plastic bag that I'm going to use once.
Throw away.
And so we've become much more connected with these systems and the implications of them, I think. Hugo, you started to talk a little bit about the benefits that your garden brings to the occupants. Can you just elaborate on some of those human benefits to the connections to nature that you see and that you've read about?
Yeah, and just before I do, I was just thinking about that last point as well about and all your thing about systems at the moment. But I guess we've got to remember that nature is a very complex web of systems and food chains, and it's not about the one thing of planting trees. It's not about the one thing of trying to embody carbon, but it's working when we're designing. It's understanding the systems that nature has and being very sensitive and responding to those systems. It is underground, it's the soils, it is, it's the plant life, it is the insects, it is the predators. And actually, for a successful landscape that we're designing and to integrate nature into the built environment, it's understanding all of the systems and where they slot together to ensure we are living in harmony with nature. But then going forward into benefits and how do we engage people with nature. I think for us it's thinking about the different avenues, what that means. It's experiences, it's nostalgia, it's atmospheres, senses. It's all of these things that we can transport ourselves away from the built environment into nature and engage back in with that. So when we are designing, we don't really have a signature style. We concentrate on the signature approach. It is listening with the clients and the users of the garden, spending a lot of time really getting our understanding spot on and thinking about where the site is, the vernacular of the site, the local endemic plants, the stone, the geology, the habitats already inhabiting that space, and then a very sensitive approach really to try and make sure that we are designing gardens that are suited to that spot, right for the client, and will grow and evolve over years and years and years, and get better and age and just work like it should do. Not instant impact. And so really taking our clients on that journey, engaging with them, to make sure that is the right response. We've got a lovely project in Devon at the moment. It's 60 acres of farmland, and she bought it to build a new house, but also wanted to get into the nature that was already there. It was intensively farmed, but there were some interesting spots of wildlife and biodiversity, and she really wanted to create a house and a landscape that she could be living with nature. So we spent a lot of time thinking about it and actually doing surveys and monitoring and speaking to experts in the area, and designing not very much really, just actually responding to looking at management techniques for this landscape. And that really responded to this idea of a chaos theory of observation and reacting and testing bits of management and then responding to those the following year. So no drastic measures, no let's flail all the hedges, let's maybe lay an eighth of the hedges in 1 year, see how that goes, then lay another eighth, through to putting electric collars on the cows to see how they move so we can control graze in different areas, but then respond and not just go, that's the system we're going to use. So this is one I guess example of how we're working with our clients, but also working with nature to make sure that we're working in harmony to create a landscape that's also within harmony with our clients and how they're going to enjoy them.
It's interesting, that idea of technology, isn't it? Because in a way, when the Industrial Revolution started and we become more technologically advanced, we started to ride roughshod over nature and say, well, nature can do its stuff, but we could do it better. And through a more intensive, higher carbon-based approach, we started using fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides. We could cultivate nature in a way better than it could do itself. But of course, there were massive implications for that. Not only killing nature, but then re-supporting it through technology. And it seems now there's a movement away from that heavy embedded use of technology towards a more data-driven, analytical approach to go, how can we use technology to allow nature to do its stuff better, to work hand in hand with it? Is that right?
Absolutely, it's being more sensitive, low inputs, high outputs, and absolutely trying to learn from nature. That if we have become disconnected, we do need to learn back again from nature. We designed a kitchen garden up at Bridgewater for the RHS, and very different demographic up there. And the brief was really great from the RHS. It was to create a walled kitchen garden for the 21st century. But because it's a very different demographic, we wanted to show people how they might be able to grow at home, and how they might have a tiny north-facing shady plot, not a big 2-acre walled garden like the Victorians had, but using principles like permaculture. So we've got a section within that kitchen garden, which is a forest garden, and understanding the principles of permaculture. You might have heard of Martin Crawford, who's done many books on permaculture. He's got a little site in Devon, and amazing sort of low input, high output, working with nature, perennial crops, edible climbers, lots of different things, to be more sensitive, and not just the typical way of doing things.
Can I talk a little bit about technology in that respect?
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you initially. I think as many of us, in the UK, 90% of us live in cities, and we forget that people's lives can be more connected to nature, and their well-being, both physical, mental, and financial, can be very much connected to the well-being of nature. When we spoke previously, you spoke very poetically about the lives of the people who live with the cork trees, and it'd be great if you could just sort of tell the audience about the people who grow these cork trees, what essentially is a cork tree, and why is it a good sustainable material to use, and what does a sustainable environment, regenerative environment, look like for them?
Yeah, okay. So our cork mainly comes from Portugal, from the Alentejo region, which is down above the Algarve, and they cultivate cork trees there. So it's a crop that they plant and harvest, specifically to make cork stoppers. And the Quercus suber, which is the cork oak tree, is particularly suitable for cork. So that's the only oak tree that will allow you to use the bark for cork. I think the girls have got a piece down there that they can pass around. So you have this idyllic forest that looks nothing like a cultivated high density forest, because cork oak trees need space to really prosper. So you have, like here, you have this just incredibly beautiful place with cork oak trees dotted everywhere. And because it's expansive like that, you get the undergrowth, the understory grows, and then you have the grasslands grow. So it supports a huge amount of biodiversity. Incredible numbers of wildlife creatures and birds and animals live there. The corks stabilize the land. So you have a very idyllic picture, but there's also cork oak trees dotted around the villages and such like. There's cork oak trees in people's gardens. So the cooperatives will come and harvest your oak tree for you every 9 years, and then they'll write the number on it of the year they harvested it, and then 9 years later they'll come back. So even people living in these tiny villages, and it's quite a poor part of Portugal, are benefiting from the industry hands-on like that. These Montado, the cork oak forests, are very, very highly regulated, so that they don't get a very fine balance. I think the World Wildlife Foundation said that the Montado, the cork oak forests, are one of the greatest examples of how to balance conservation with development, and that benefits both humans and nature. It's almost a perfect balance. So you have this idyllic scenario. The guys that cut the bark from the trees are amongst the most highly paid agricultural workers in Europe, because it's such a skill not to damage the tree when you take the bark every 9 years. So a team of these descorticadores, I think they're called, will go in there and they'll strip the tree, and that will then go off to the factories for processing. And in Portugal, I think there's 100,000 people involved in that industry, or directly in the cork manufacturing industry or spin-off industries, but also in the agriculture that goes on in the Montado. So there's grazing of livestock, there's foraging. So it's providing work for a lot of other people outside the cork industry directly. And that is a sustainable way of manufacturing. When you get to the factory, the cork stoppers are punched out of the bark. Again, there'll be something that you can see that shows that. And the waste is basically what everything made of cork that's not a bottle stopper is. It's waste cork from that production. It's also recycled cork from collection points around Europe, not so much in the UK yet, but in Europe, which gets reincorporated back into cork products. So you've got this kind of circular economy going on, and even the dust that is created when you punch and stamp the corks out, that's used to create the biomass energy to fuel the factories. So I think 80% of our factory in Portugal is run on cork dust, powered by cork dust. So you have this fantastic kind of story that evolves through to the end product, and the result is a product that's very natural and contains and has collected a huge amount of carbon in its life and retains that. So
Great.
Quite special.
Thank you. So going back to kind of biophilic design directly and the built environment, how can a biophilic design approach, a nature-loving approach, support the idea of better reusing what we already have? You know, it's said that by 2050, 80% of the built environment that we're currently living in will still be existing. So we're only going to build 20% more houses and buildings by 2050. So how can we combine a low carbon approach with an approach that respects nature and supports our well-being and the well-being of nature all around us? Yes.
So, I think biophilic design is such an essential key to refurbishing, renovating, regenerating buildings, cities, sad spaces. That I think it's just so diverse, interdisciplinary kind of approach. I was interviewing Dr. Leighton Phillips, actually, from NHS Wales for a podcast, and he's written in the journal. But I was saying, well, how are we going to do that? How can we get biophilic design into the NHS? How are we going to do that? How can we do that? And the way when he said this, it was like, well, this is what we could do for everything, schools, homes, everything. When we're regenerating, when you have to make an investment, when you have to do something new, when you have to buy like your new tables or whatever it is, buy better, buy green, buy a obviously all using the biophilic principles, natural woods and soft furnishings and all that sort of stuff. There's that option, and I think that's the key to kind of getting it in. But I mean, in terms of like the elements of biophilic design, I mean, it's so wonderful, isn't it? I mean, it's just, reopening windows to bring natural airflow in. It doesn't cost the earth, but it's just a rethink. It's a rethink about what you've got. And, obviously in architecture, you're the man for that. Opening up the window spaces for more light coming in. So you don't need to have so much energy use on the light fittings. Obviously the beautiful stuff like the cork, you can bring in these beautiful tactile, sensual and sensory materials that will really enliven and enlighten a space and your workforce and your nurses and your doctors and your children who are like trying to learn. And I mean, I read a really interesting fact that if you're looking at wood, you add up better. So, we don't need to have white spaces. When I did an event recently, there was the guys who were, obviously they were completely something else. They was in health and safety, and they came over and, what do you do? And I said, anyway, they brought tables in. They were suppliers, and I think that's probably one of the keys as well, is how we need to change the supply chain. So the supply chain needs to be educated and needs to be switched up so that they bring in, they don't offer the bad stuff. They don't offer the thing that's going to deplete our planet. They bring in the stuff that's going to enhance and respect and create jobs and more positive community spaces all around the world. So it's a proper joined up effect. I don't know if that was actually answered to your question. I might have gone off on a bit of a tangent.
It's a good start. It's a good start. Hugo, how do you think about the reuse materials in a way that it will both improve the sustainability of your project, so to reduce the carbon, but also to provide benefit for people and nature?
think reuse, reduce as well, and materials we are using is vital. I think we are absolutely reusing materials more. We're using reclaimed materials more. In urban sites, we're thinking, when we look at those sites, brownfield sites, we're looking, what were those sites originally, and we look at the stories and the history behind those, so that we can then think about those materials in their context of what they were used for. And sometimes it's about just reimagining them, the existing materials on site, and just using them completely different. If it's a surface, if it's a concrete surface which is cracked and we want to dig it up, what else can we use that for? Can we actually break it, tumble it? Could it go into gabions and create retaining walls? Could it create, habitat areas? We're working on quite a number of brownfield sites at the moment in Europe, and that is absolutely the route we're taking. It's not taking materials off-site. That's expensive. It incurs more carbon even travelling them around. So it's about reimagining them. So either reusing them as is, do we treat them to make them, or clean them to make them, bring life back out of them, or is it reimagining them, using them in a completely different way? And I think, that in combination with maybe special elements you might bring in, it might be, cork or timber furniture. It's very much thinking about natural materials as well, so that it's that, again, subconscious link with nature. If you're sitting on a timber seat, connecting with nature, that feels like you're connecting with nature more than if you're sitting on something porcelain or, concrete. So there's a combination of, natural materials, reusing materials, and things which last longer. Like Vanessa said, things that last, they patina, they age gracefully, they don't peel, they don't flake. You don't have to replace them after 5 years because it was a fashionable product. We're in Stourhead, a beautiful garden, big lumps of stone, things that will be here for hundreds of years. And I think it's that mindset of using things which absolutely will withstand climate change, extra heat, extra flooding, and designing in a way which is durable.
I love that idea of reuse of materials, not just to reduce the need to kind of take stuff away and bring new materials back, but also to create a sense of what we call cultural and ecological identity to place, to kind of connect people to the place. This isn't just we've whitewashed the old place and you've got something new. It still has a sense of continuity about where you are. It talks about the history. It's reflective of that, and I love that. I guess the discipline of having, for a designer to go, well, how do we reuse that in a way that's going to be thought-provoking, or to create a sense of patina or age or sense of awareness about history. And that kind of brings me on to the next question of, technology. There's so much conversation, since last year about technology and AI and the potential threat that it has. But James, with you, in your view, and not necessarily AI orientated, but in what ways might technology help us to design the built environment to reduce our carbon emissions, but also to create healthier places?
I'm not too well up on AI, but
I don't think anyone is right now, and we're all wondering what's it going to do. And I think there are threats, but also opportunities.
Yeah, I think everyone's a little bit scared of AI at the moment, but I'm sure that I'm sure that if it's controlled and it's used for the right reasons, then it'll be great.
Oh, it definitely will be. We're so good at that
Yeah,
stuff.
well, that's
we'd never just let the horse
slightly
bolt.
cynical, but I agree with you. So there is that risk that it'll get gobbled up into more financially driven areas. But let's just assume that we do the right thing with it. I think it can help in many ways.
But, I guess AI aside, in what ways is technology helping the cork industry
is really important. So for us, I'm just going to echo what Hugo said about that longevity. Keeping things on the floor for as long as you possibly can is really at the core of what we want to do. And we can't do that with cork because it's quite a soft material unless we use high-tech synthetic finishes on the top of the product. And people say, oh, you're using a plastic, a synthetic finish. And I would say, yeah, we are, but we're only using a very small proportion of that in relation to the whole product, and the whole product's carbon footprint is extremely low. So what we're trying to do with that is give it that longevity so that it stays on the floor longer and longer. And I think the technology, the advancements in that kind of technology and wood finishes is massive at the moment, and I think that's really exciting for product manufacturers like us. to know that we can make that. The other thing about technology is we're finding ways to recycle more and more products. So I think that's a big problem, is not being able to recycle stuff that we have that can be reused effectively. So we have stuff, we have waste, we have stuff that we just cannot find a way of recycling, and it becomes difficult. If we could recycle more things, and technology should allow that, we can incorporate those things back into our products. So for me, cork, we make a plank that is basically granulated cork. I can mix that with recycled glass, recycled plastics, recycled things, all sorts of things. If I can source those, I can reintroduce them into a product that's already very sustainable, and that just perpetuates the development of that product and enables us to make interesting and exciting interiors by using technology rather than just being overly traditional in what we're trying to do.
And can you foresee a time when we will start to give materials and products in buildings, let's say a material passport, that when they're taken up, you can go, okay, well, this comes from here. It was produced by that person. Let's just give it back to them and see what, maybe it's their responsibility to go, well, if you made it,
you take it back.
You take it back and you deal with it. So that would sort of reduce that risk of people making complicated products that can't be separated and can't be reused, and hands the onus back to the manufacturers.
Yeah, I do see that, but I think it's an extremely complicated place to get to, because there's so many factors that would influence that passport, as it were. But I think a unified standard for products that helps people understand a good product from a bad product is a massive bonus for everybody, and I don't think we're there yet.
So you have EPDs, don't you? Environmental
we have EPDs,
product
which I think are
declarations.
probably the closest that we've got, but I'm not sure how many people understand what an EPD is or the value of an EPD yet, but that would be the closest thing that we have, I think.
And it doesn't necessarily say this is a good product. It just says this is it's like the ingredients list.
It's the ingredients list, it's the carbon footprint, it's the pollution it might cause, but manufacturers will put it out there because they are trying to show you that they're moving in the right direction. So an EPD is a statement of intent and a statement of willingness to change.
I guess if you can't measure it, you can't do anything, and you can't understand it, you can't do anything about wanting to make it better.
No, but you can look at a product and know that it's better just by looking at it. So there are products that you can see clearly are going to be better, and there's products that you think, really, is that an environmental eco product? So I think there's a certain amount of obviousness in what you choose to a degree.
Okay, so we've got time for just one or two more questions before we hand it over to you, the audience. So if you've got any questions, write them down. We've got a microphone that we could pass around as well. One last question. There are obviously there's a lot of stress associated with climate change. It can be difficult to remain optimistic. But what gives you hope, Ness, about things that are happening right now that will create positive benefits into the future, that relate the way we design the built environment, our relationship with nature, to mitigate, the effects of climate change, but also create better, healthier, happier spaces? I mean, are there projects or things going on?
Well, there's something I read recently. Utrecht has got a no empty roof policy. So obviously that's coming down from city, this sort of biophilic city kind of environment. But it means that there's it can be bee boxes and there's plants and there's food. Obviously will help our food security. So stuff like that is really, really exciting me, actually. And there's a lot of joined up stuff that's going on. People working like manufacturers, designers, people with different brains coming together. And I think when I started doing the journal, there was a little bit of that. And I suppose maybe the more you find out, the more it starts coming together. But I'm actually really optimistic. I'm not an optimistic person generally, but I'm actually even more super optimistic because, there's amazing design. There's, you're like yourselves, you're thinking about how you can create better. And there's, and I think that there's awards like the Stephen Keller Awards and that, for good design that are really trying to highlight how we can do things better, really. So from my point of view, I think that's one of the key things. It's that coming together. The conversations are more. The
Stephen Keller Awards. I was a judge on that, and the winner was a beautiful school in the Netherlands called De Wandering, and it's just if you want to look up an amazing example of how you can fuse nature and education spaces, look that up. DEVWOR.
Devondering.
I didn't even finish the spelling, but yeah. Hugo, what's sort of giving you hope? I mean, is it the way your clients are talking to you about nature? Is it other sort of great schemes that are going on around the world? Is there sort of a greater sense of joined up thinking?
Yeah, we're definitely getting more inquiries. I think one exciting one is in the commercial world. I think we've been sort of shouting quite a lot about green infrastructure, parks, gardens, landscapes in cities. Green infrastructure needs to be considered as important as power, electricity and water. We need our green spaces to be connected. We need those green corridors. And we are now seeing, I think, even more so since COVID, since work places and big companies realise that people need to enjoy going to work and they need to have green spaces to sit in and be within. We're seeing more of these developers wanting true meaningful green spaces within the developments they're doing. So we're doing a forest on a rooftop in London where we're 1.4 acres of pure roof, and we're putting 100 trees onto it and making it a roof with over 1.2 meters worth of soil across the whole thing. So we have an actual landscape which will be, green infrastructure. It's got computer systems in it, so it can see the weather forecast. It can discharge water, so it can take more storm water when it rains. It's clever, so it can start working as a real life piece of green infrastructure on a roof. And I think we are seeing more and more of these types of projects, and I think that is exciting, seeing how our cities will evolve and become greener, as long as developers are interested in spending the money on it. And we've got, and there are people out there now which are interested, and I think more companies and employees are demanding that of their employers as well.
Yeah. I love that idea that when we talk about smart cities, it's not just how we put in ever faster broadband and communications, but that technology and the communications also goes to supporting the nature, or as you say, the green infrastructure that we're putting in that provides the mutualistic benefits for both people in those buildings and also the nature around them. James, what's giving you hope?
Well, Planted has given me hope. Things like this.
It's a great event, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great event. You can't not walk in here and smile because of what you see, and it just lifts your heart and gives you hope for the future. So I think events like this and organisations like Planted are essential. I think there's more people talking about it, and the more people talk about it, the more traction it gets. So we give a little bit of money for everything we sell to a charity called Fauna and Flora International, which is the world's largest wildlife conservation charity. And they're working really hard because conservation of wildlife is tied into conservation of forests and mangrove swamps and these massive carbon sinks. So the whole thing is interwoven very, very tightly. So I feel that if we can help organisations like them a little bit, and if more people did it, that would be great. Because they really have a strong voice and a powerful voice. And they're talking at the top level as well, where we really need to see change happening. So for me, from a little business point of view, that seems to be a good solution for me.
Great. Thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. So we could shout them out. We've got a microphone here. We have a willing assistant to hand it out. So do we have any questions? Put your hands up. In the blue hat over there. I will make sure it's got a question mark at the end, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does the panel agree that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are amongst the most important plans for the planet?
Good question.
That's a really good question. Yes. I think, do you know what I think? I mean, we uphold them. We've got things on our website that say about them. And I think as ground rules, I think they're really good. I think as things for people to subscribe to, as cities to subscribe to, businesses to, healthcare units, education, societies, charities, grassroots groups. I think they're really good key pointers to uphold. I think, again, it comes down to education, but I think people also need to know about them. Some people don't understand, you say SDGs and they go like, what's that? I don't know, I think that piece needs to be more, or the conversations maybe need to be accelerated. Maybe somebody needs to put their foot on the accelerator pedal a little bit and get people talking about them so they understand not just that what they are, but actually what the impact is and how you can get involved and actually action something to do that in wherever you are, your businesses, your communities and stuff. So I think the actual actioning bit is actually the bit that really needs to happen with those, but that's just my thought.
Anybody else? Okay. From my perspective, I think what's really important right now is that we don't focus solely on carbon. If we just look at carbon as being a way to mitigate the effects of climate change, then we're going to forget that our relationship with nature has been utterly destroyed. We've turned our back on nature. And if the natural world collapses through biodiversity loss, then literally we are not going to have a place to live. So I think the importance of it is just to get you to think in a wider, more conceptual way that we are mutually connected. Our health and well-being is intrinsically connected to nature. And I think it sort of expands the conversation.
I was actually just going to say as well, because there's obviously there about sort of social well-being, education, food security, all those aspects, which again, because we've raped and pillaged our planet and our food security is all up the wall. I think, being able to pull those elements together as well, I think actually to thread them together as a tapestry, I think is a good thing. So.
Okay, lovely. Any other questions? Hands up. Lady in the glasses.
Hiya. I'm an interior designer, so I'm interested to know from yourself, Hugo, and James, tends to be that the more sustainable options are the more expensive options when it comes to home design, garden design, even though they are much better for the planet. So I'm interested to know how you educate your clients as to that being the better option and how you balance that against budget.
Well, sorry,
You go.
I think if you look at product, you can see that a natural product like wood or say cork is it has these natural patterns. It ages. It just has a look of something different, and I think that adds value to the product. But it's also very expensive to manufacture a green product like that, because it's kind of non-standard, and anything non-standard is complicated, and big manufacturers don't particularly like to do it because it doesn't keep the machines rolling. So there's a kind of premium involved in designing and manufacturing that product from our point of view. As it becomes more mainstream, though, those costs can come down and you can make it more accessible, and you can adapt the product. But I don't feel that you want to undermine the product too much to lose the purity of the story. So my view is that it won't be suitable for everybody or every job, but it will be suitable for enough people to make it important.
I think I'd just add that, just reusing materials for projects. I think we don't want to compromise on quality and the environmentally elements of it. So sometimes it's about doing less and still building gardens and landscapes which will withstand the test of time, but looking how we use materials carefully, looking how we use plant procurement carefully, and maybe we just have to do less with the budget available, or maybe we phase projects. There's so many projects now where we're just phasing them over a longer period of time, so it allows there to be fundraising or or generation of income to enable us to develop a master plan. But it might have be 10 years over rather than 1 year, because we don't want to cut on the environment, or quality.
Well, the question was to these guys, so I think persuading people longevity is a key thing, and also the fact that it helps supports communities and things like that too. So
yeah, I'm gonna jump in here as well. I think for me it's really about the true cost of what it is to create a space. We've become sort of clouded by the fact that we can buy plastic replica wood lookalike flooring. forgetting the fact that actually there is an implication to the manufacturing of that complex product. There are toxins involved with it. So when we talk about the true cost, what's the cost to the environment? Which people might go, "Oh, well, it's just, don't worry about that." But then also, if you talk about the true cost of bringing a material that might be more cheaply made, that contains formaldehydes and volatile organic compounds into your home, and you say, well, you can have this cheap product and it will slowly poison you, along with all the other formaldehydes and other things that you're going to be bringing into your home. Yeah, you can have that, or you can have a natural product that is going to be durable, that you won't need to replace as often, that gets better with age, and that won't poison you. Then it becomes much clearer once you start to uncover and sort of discuss the real cost and the real value of taking a nature-based approach. And when you talk about people choosing materials that will knowingly poison their families, it's quite a clear discussion. That was a bit serious, wasn't it?
Very well.
Oh, sorry. Any other questions?
Hello. This was inspired actually by something that James said when you mentioned that you've been combining cork with plastic and glass. And I just wanted to kind of offer a question to everyone about materials and what are the most kind of interesting materials that you've been working with recently, or what's the most kind of exciting materials that are kind of on the horizon that you maybe are excited to use, or you've maybe had access to people who've been manufacturing as part of the journal.
One for us is one that we were doing at Chelsea this year, actually. It's a product that we were sort of developing and R&Ding, is actually how can we create flat surfaces for people in wheelchairs and in higher accessible areas. At the moment, there's typically resin-bonded gravels. They're the only ones which really sort of suit there, because they can be flat and they allow water through, and we need to do something for the Herbaceous garden, and we didn't want to use that product. And so we explored how we reuse crushed bricks, waste, broken paving stones, limestone, things like that, and bring those into a mix with a cement-free binder to look at like an eco-terrazzo. And so we've been exploring that over the past year and a half, and we showcased it at Chelsea, and that's still in its early days of development. So that's one for us.
I was going to say, yeah, just a couple of things. Well, there's loads of things actually that I think, but the two things that come to my mind is one is there's a company whose name you guys might remember. They're using sheep wool and they're manufacturing them in chairs. I don't know if they're here.
Solid wool. Solid
wool. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen their stuff, but that's really, really cool. They're using like Herdwick wool and things, and they're making these beautiful chairs out of them. So you've kind of like you're sitting on a sheep that's not going to bite your bum, or damage the floor, put on the floor as well. So it's also good. But also like you're saying about the crushed brick, I interviewed Sedum Green Roofs who are here as well. And they use the crushed brick on one of their layers of their sedum roofs. So it's just there's all these different things are so exciting. There's people doing things so differently. It's lovely to hear what you're doing as well. So
we're not doing it yet, but it is possible to introduce wool into a cork floor as well. So there's all sorts of things you can do. You've just got to find the time to find the suppliers and experiment with these things. So there's lots of opportunity.
Great. We've got time for one more question. Gentleman with the check shirt.
When you're using composite materials that you've repurposed, how do you then go on to recycle them at their end of life? Because composite materials are notoriously hard to recycle.
Well, with difficulty, I would answer that. It's not easy to break them down, and I think a lot of products might be tagged as theoretically recyclable, but the reality of it is that it's not easy oftentimes. And often these products are affixed to things, so just getting them off of what they're affixed to is quite difficult without undermining it. So I think that area is a little bit of a loose area to define. I mean, I could say that Recork is recyclable, but I would struggle to answer how you would go about getting it off the floor and getting it somewhere where it can be then broken down and reused. And I think a lot of work needs to be done to detail how you might break down a composite product specifically and how that then might go on to be used in different products going forward. Sometimes you can just chop them up and stick them into road fill or road stone and things like that. So some things can be broken down quite easily. But as you say, most composite products need to be separated, and I think that's the challenge.
It is. It's a massive challenge for our age, isn't it? I'm not necessarily thinking how do we come up with shiny new materials, but how do we keep those materials in a loop of usefulness and what we call the circular economy, making sure that they are continuously reused, maybe not necessarily for exactly the same use, but we go from, say, flooring to road fill or the sort of hardcore used on sort of green roofs and things. But I think, enormous opportunities there to do better into the future.
I'm just going to add one little tiny thing. In the fashion industry, obviously I'm not a fashionista at all. I kind of stuff I've had for like years, so you've probably seen me in this about 15 times. But there's an aggregator, there's a group that are finding fashion and then repurposing it. But it's a digital connectivity thing that's online. That's a kind of membership body, but that's kind of doing that as kind of as a funnel. So yeah, it was kind of
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion as much as I have, looking into kind of the role that our connection to nature has on mitigating the impact of the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. And I wanted to thank our panellists, Vanessa, Hugo, and James. So please give them a big round of applause. And also to our sponsors, Richmond Bell Architects. I'd also like to thank the National Trust for hosting us, Stourhead House, the fantastic location. It's quite rare for me to be at a conference that is so deeply embedded in nature, so this is just an absolute treat for me. I'd like to thank PYTCH for the AV production, along with SolCell, who have allowed this production to be powered entirely by renewable energy, by the PV panels over there, so that's kind of a first as well. If you enjoyed this talk, you can see others like it that we've recorded over the years at the website, which is planted-community.co.uk. There's articles, there's interviews, there's loads of products and organisations who've chosen to partner with us at the Planted Communities. So do go and check that out. And in the meantime, please do go and enjoy the rest of Planted Country. There are some amazing product suppliers. There's the Verve Wellness Festivals. Do go and speak to people as well, because everybody here has been through a journey to make their products better, to make them healthier, both for people and planet. So there's loads of amazing stories. You've got some incredible expertise and knowledge going on out there. And thank you all to you for coming and joining us. My name's Oliver Heath, and this has been Biophilic Design and Climate Change. Thank you very much.